Welcome everyone. This is the EU ILO OECD Responsible Supply Chains in Asia program webinar. We're going to start in a couple of minutes. We're just letting folks in. Please put yourselves on mute when you come in so that we reduce the background noises. And we're very pleased to see so many of you joining us today. So thank you very much. My name is Shivani Kanabiran and I'm with the OECD, leading the work on responsible agricultural supply chains. But let's give folks a couple more minutes. I see the numbers are moving up. And welcome everyone who's connected to, if you'd like, you can rename yourself by putting in your organization beside your name or in front of your name, because I think that's always helpful so that folks know what perspective you're coming from and which organization you're speaking on behalf of. But we're really excited to see so many of you. So with no further ado, I just would like to welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. We have folks from many different parts of the world joining us today, primarily from Southeast Asia, certainly, but also from Europe. My name is Shivani Kanabiran. I'm with the OECD and work closely on agricultural supply chains. That's what I live and breathe pretty much every day. I'm part of the OECD Center for Responsible Business Conduct. And today I'd like to welcome you to the closing event of the OECD Southeast Asia Pilot Project with agribusiness that we've been conducting under the EU ILO OECD Responsible Supply Chains in Asia program. Again, welcome to everyone. I just want to go through some housekeeping. So maybe Robin, if you could go to the next slide, please. Many of you are excited to ask questions and we really welcome that. We're doing our best to try and make this as interactive as possible. But we have a limited time. So I would suggest that everybody submit questions or comments. And I see you've already started doing that. Welcome, Ruby, good to see you. Just submit your questions and comments in the chat function. So you see down here this yellow arrow, fantastic. I see folks are beginning to use it. When you have a question, you can ask anytime. Please state your organization. Also, if your question is addressed to someone in particular, let us know. The moderators will be keeping track of that and we'll be able to then ask your question to our panelists. This is an interactive session and we know we've got a lot of people who have a lot of experience who are on the line, not just the panelists, not just the folks who are speaking. So please feel free to share with us links to reports, projects that you're working on that might be useful. We leave it to your good judgment to decide what is relevant to share with folks on the line. Just so everyone is aware, we have a very multi-stakeholder audience, a very broad audience. We have people from government, from policymakers, from international organizations, regional organizations. We also have many businesses, investors. We also have civil society. And representatives from worker unions as well. So it's a very broad coalition of folks who've certainly registered for this, and I hope they're able to also come this morning or this afternoon. Fantastic. With this, I am now going to turn over to Cristina Tebales to provide us with some opening remarks. Cristina Tebales is the acting head of the Center for Responsible Business Conduct at the OECD. So Cristina, Rena, and myself work very closely together. Cristina, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shivani. I will start with a few thank you notes. First of all, I would like to thank the EU for their immense support to our work on RBC in Asia under the Responsible Supply Chain in Asia program. And this OECD Southeast Asia pilot is one of the actions under the program, and we're really grateful to the EU for supporting all this work. We also would like to thank the governments from the region and the business, especially the companies who have participated in this pilot. And of course, we also want to thank the international organizations with which we are working on this program, the ILO and the FAO, as well as ASEAN and regional stakeholders for an ongoing collaboration and support. Thank you very much to all. So just to get into the gist of the matter, in light of the growing global problems such as climate change, the COVID-19 pandemic, persistent human rights violations in agricultural supply chains and environmental degradation, it's clear that we need a change at scale now. The OECD FAO guidance is part of the solution. It is a tool for companies to identify and prevent risks in the supply chain and helps meet the sustainable development goals. But we need to increase its uptake and the impact. So what action needs to be prioritized? And who needs to be part of this conversation? This is what we're going to discuss in today's event. And I look forward to hearing from our speakers and you, the audience, on your views on these topics. And I'm positive that together we can address these challenges and find ways to meet the SDGs. To do this, in this first sessions, we have 3 keynote speakers. We have Mr. Laurent Lourdet, who is Counselor for Agriculture, SPS and Environment of the EU delegation to the Kingdom of Thailand. Mr. Lourdet has worked in international affairs as head of the section ASEAN Relations, engaging in free trade agreements negotiation with ASEAN countries. We also have Dr. Frank Quang Min, who is Assistant Director of Food, Agriculture and Forestry Division at ASEAN Secretariat. He works with the ASEAN member states, various international and dialogue partners to promote ASEAN cooperation on food, agriculture and forestry, to conduct related policies and measures under ASEAN Economic Community Blueprint, and to promote international dialogues between ASEAN international partners in the food, agriculture and forestry sector. And our third keynote speaker is Mr. Pascal Liu, who is Senior Economist at the FAO. He leads the team on responsible global value change at the Trade and Markets Division. Pascal co-leads with the OECD Center for RBC the implementation program of the OECD FAO guidance for responsible agricultural supply chains. And with this, I invite Laurent to give us his keynote speak in 6 to 8 minutes, please. Thank you very much. Laurent, the floor is yours.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Well, thank you very much, Christina, for this introduction. Hello, everybody. I'm sorry because of the quality of the video, because I have to do it from my phone, unfortunately. But I hope you can hear me and see me. So yes, their ASEAN representatives, their OECD team, their ILO team, their business representatives, their ladies and gentlemen, and of course, I know that in the attendance today, there are the Undersecretary from the Philippines, so a warm welcome also to the Philippine authorities. I would like to thank you for inviting me as representative of the EU delegation to Thailand to participate to this closing event of the Southeast Asia Pilot on responsible agricultural supply chains. This pilot is an important landmark and deliverable of the Responsible Supply Chain Asia project. Agriculture is at the heart of our lives, and COVID-19 crisis reminds us how essential food and agriculture are, and how important it is to secure a robust and resilient system ensuring food safety, food security, and also food quality. Cooperation between private sectors, private stakeholders, and the policymakers is not optional. It is crucial in order to build a sustainable economy and a sustainable food system we all need. In that respect, I would like to thank all the companies from Myanmar, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam for their very valuable involvement in this pilot project and their contribution to the survey, whatever the size or the scope of operation is. Let me also thank concerned national authorities for their essential role in this project. Last but not least, I would like to thank the OECD, which has produced a tremendous amount of work and a very high quality and very informative report within a short period of time. Today's event will be the occasion to discuss the pilot findings and recommendations and get some feedback from participants and stakeholders. Key learnings from this project, which will be presented in a few minutes, look very promising actually. In the EU, a recent study on due diligence requirements to the supply chains published in February 2020 showed that 70% of business respondents agree that the EU level rules on due diligence may bring benefits for their business. It is clearly seen as an opportunity in the EU. The fact that Asian operators seem to be on the same page is very positive news. I am also looking forward, of course, to hearing how risk-based due diligence and responsible agricultural supply chains can be scaled up in the region. Given the huge potential of agri-food production in Asia and ASEAN in particular, and the level of exports to the EU, it is essential for operators to integrate due diligence from the onset in their development and business strategies. The recent upgrade of the EU-ASEAN relationship to strategic relationship, actually a few weeks ago, will allow more institutional dialogue and cooperation on this issue in the future. When the RSC Asia project was launched, sustainability and responsibility in trade and business were already high in the EU agenda, but certainly not as high as it is the case today. The new Commission political priorities and the economic and social recovery in a post-COVID-19 era will rely on responsible supply chains, not only as an added value, but as a must-have. Expectations from the EU citizens as regards sustainability have never been stronger, and notably for agriculture and food. Producing food clearly is not anymore about feeding people only at any cost. The new EU Farm to Fork strategy, which is at the heart of the EU Green Deal, addresses comprehensively the challenges of sustainable food system and recognizes the link between healthy people, healthy societies, and healthy planet without leaving no one behind. Recent initiatives on sustainable corporate governance, mandatory due diligence will foster long-term sustainable and responsible corporate behavior in Europe and trade partners. I will get back to these new EU policy strategies later today, but for the moment I will limit my introduction to these words and let participants exchange further on their experiences and key findings. So again, thank you very much for organizing this event. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Laurent. And indeed, the developments in the EU under the Green Deal, the development of due diligence regulation, the Farm to Fork initiatives, all these are, of course, great supporters to our work. And we are extremely grateful also for the cooperation that we have with the EU on all these other topics that, of course, feed into the project in Asia as well. So thank you very much for highlighting all these developments. I now turn to our second keynote speaker, Dr. Pham Quang Minh, who, as I said, is Assistant Director for Food, Agriculture and Forestry at the ASEAN Secretariat. Dr. Pham, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christina. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, good mornings and good afternoon from Jakarta, Indonesia, of course. Let me start by expressing my sincere thanks and appreciations to the organizers, OECD Central for Responsible Business Conduct, for your warm welcome and leadership as a multi-stakeholder meeting for responsible agricultural supply chain in Southeast Asia. I'm confident that this event will be able to provide recommendations to moving forward in addressing the main issues on responsible agricultural supply chains in the region. I also believe that these closing events will successfully mark the conclusion of a pilot project with agribusinesses in Southeast Asia. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce a bit about ASEAN. The ASEAN is a promising destination with a population of more than 640 million people. ASEAN has emerged to a state of formal establishments of ASEAN communities. We also hear about ASEAN. We also set up the ASEAN community. The 2015 Kuala Lumpur statement on the establishment of the ASEAN community has set a new milestone in the integration process that will ensure lasting peace, security, and resilience in an outward-looking region. ASEAN community building is an ongoing process to further consolidate ASEAN as a politically cohesive, economically integrated, and socially responsible community for the well-being of the peoples. ASEAN is committed to promote people's participation in the community building process so that they can benefit fully from ASEAN integration. We also wish to know that the ASEAN strengths come from this diversity, and this creates vast and varied business opportunity in the region. Strategically located in Asia, ASEAN is well positioned to serve as the hub for regional and global multinational companies. In this connection, ASEAN welcomes investors to take advantage of and tap into the competitive environment and the diverse resources in the regions, making it an attractive, free, and open investment destination. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, agriculture is a vital sector for the ASEAN community and accounting for over 25% GDP in some ASEAN member states. Investment in food, agriculture, and forestry is critical to provide employment, livelihoods, and reduce poverty for rural and forest population across ASEAN. Though the food, agriculture, and forestry sectors vary widely within ASEAN, it remains a strategic sector in most ASEAN countries and in a major source of employment and income for the large proportion of the population. With over 100 million hectares of agricultural land, ASEAN is major producer and supplier of grains, particularly rice. You can see some exporter of rice in the region like Thailand or Vietnam, and some other exporting for rice, including Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laos, PDS. And of course, ASEAN is the world's largest producer of palm oils and natural rubbers. In the regions, investors come into ASEAN agriculture, forestry, and fisheries are also from different countries, including Japan, United States, European Union, Republic of Korea, China, India, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. And Japan, European Union, and China are the biggest investor for ASEAN agriculture, forestry, and fishing. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, as the demand for food increases due to the growing population, rising incomes, and urbanization in ASEAN, agriculture will continue to attract foreign and domestic investment. Increasing investment in food, agriculture, and forestry in ASEAN is needed to help achieve food and nutrition security, to improve food safety, and to create economic growth and opportunities. Attracting investment that contributes to food security and economic growth, while at the same time conserving the environment in practice is very complex, requiring smart and effective government interventions. For example, it is insufficient to boost our food output without consideration of its nutritional content, disruption of rural or indigenous community, or impact on the climate and the environment. Agriculture, for instance, especially for the livestock farming, is a significant contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, but can also play a role in reducing or counteracting those emissions. Similarly, the practice of sustainable forestry management is often absent in this context. Investment in food, agriculture, and forestry needs to be responsible and sustainable, and specifically directs towards the achievement of social, economic, and environmental benefits, while minimizing negative impacts. The ultimate responsibility for achieving such an outcome rests with the government and the policymakers. But investors and civil society also plays a key role. Allow me to recall that in 2017, the ASEAN Minister on Agriculture and Forestry, or AMAF, agreed to develop the ASEAN guideline on promoting responsible investment in food, agriculture, and forestry. The ASEAN Secretariat also has worked with various partners to develop the guideline, also including global agencies. Subsequently, the guidelines and its implementation plan was adopted by the ASEAN Minister on Agriculture and Forestry in 2018 and 2019 respectively, to promote investment in food, agriculture, and forestry in ASEAN region. Thus contributes to regional economic development, food and nutritional security, food safety, and equitable benefits, as well as sustainable use of natural resources to meet the goals of SDG. Allow me to also highlight that the ASEAN guideline on promoting responsible investment in food, agriculture, and forestry are primarily aimed at the public sectors in ASEAN, including the governments and subsidiary agencies and institutions in each ASEAN member state. They also aim at other stakeholders, including the private sectors, civil society, communities, development partners, and others. Of course, we also encourage the private sectors, company and relevant stakeholders, when doing your business, refer to the ASEAN guidelines, along with the internationally recognized standards, such as OECD FAO guidance. These standards are complementary and mutually reinforcing and provide clear direction on what companies should integrate their corporate policy and business practices. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to highlight some efforts from ASEAN to address the impacts of COVID-19. Since it is declared a pandemic in March 2020, so COVID-19 has continued to disrupt livelihoods around the world, and ASEAN also has not been spared. Indeed, the unprecedented pandemic crisis generated unprecedented uncertainty for ASEAN, with devastating impact on economy and societies. The ASEAN comprehensive recovery framework was adopted just in November this year to serve as a consolidated exit strategy from the COVID-19 crisis. In this context, the food, agriculture, and forestry sector plays a key role, and hence once again, ASEAN also encourages all stakeholders and partners to continue implementing the ASEAN guidelines on promoting responsible investment in food, agriculture, and forestry to minimize the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic in the region. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, I do expect that this meeting we also able to provide clear recommendations to be taken up to the regional agendas to support the realization of ASEAN Vision 2025, and specifically in supporting the ASEAN Vision in food, agriculture, and forestry. The ASEAN Secretariat, we also ensure that the coordination and resource mobilized from dialogue partners, international and development partners, as well as the private sector to support agricultural cooperation and concurrence to meet our target. I believe that the support from the private sectors and international development partners will continue to promote the process of the integration of ASEAN in coming times. With that, I'd like to thank all of you, and I wish you success in this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pham. You have very well summarized the challenges that we're all facing there. The need of increased investment in agriculture, but at the same time, the need to preserve the environment, the rights of people that work in the agriculture sector. So thank you very much for highlighting that, and as well for presenting some of the measures that are being taken at the ASEAN in the ASEAN region, and of course for highlighting the importance of cooperation between all regions in the world, between OECD, FAO, ASEAN, and of course also with the private sector and civil society. I think that's really very important, and that's what we're doing with this project, and this workshop or this seminar is an example of this cooperation. So thank you very much for your very powerful words. And with this, I would like to turn to our third keynote speaker, Pascal Liu from the FAO, a long-standing partner of the OECD in this work. And I'm very, very pleased to give you the floor. Thanks for all the cooperation, Pascal, and the floor is yours now.
Thank you, Christina. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to meet you today and to discuss agriculture, responsible business conduct, and the results of the excellent work that our OECD colleagues have done under the pilot project on due diligence in Southeast Asia. First of all, I'd like to thank the OECD colleagues for their invitation to speak at this important event. I've been working with Christina, Shivani, and Rena for many years, and it's always a pleasure to be in an event with them. I think it's an excellent collaboration between FAO and OECD on responsible agricultural supply chains. So as we will hear today, the findings from this OECD project help us better understand how to foster an ecosystem for responsible business conduct and risk-based due diligence. And this type of work is really greatly needed to create a knowledge base on what works and what doesn't work to address business impacts on people and the environment. So FAO as a UN agency cooperates with the OECD to encourage sustainable development through responsible business conduct in agriculture, notably through the uptake of the OECD FAO guidance for responsible agricultural supply chains. So the guidance is a very important tool, as mentioned by Christina and Dr. Min. The guidance is referenced in the OECD project in Southeast Asia. It's an important global standard to help agricultural companies understand how they can reduce possible adverse impacts on societies and the environment. The guidance was jointly developed by FAO and the OECD to address such adverse impacts. Its development followed a comprehensive research and consultation process from October 2013 to September 2015, governed by a multi-stakeholder advisory group, including representatives from OECD and FAO, obviously, but also OECD and FAO member governments, businesses, and civil society. So it was truly multi-stakeholder and participatory, this development process of the guidance. So the guidance references several internationally agreed tools, including the CFS RIE principles, the VGGTs, which are the voluntary guidelines for the responsible governance of tenure, and the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises, among other major tools. And it's complementary to the ASEAN RIE guidelines mentioned by Dr. Min in the previous speech. The risks of adverse impact by companies can be extensive and complicated by structural development challenges, for example, poverty and governance challenges. Agriculture is the dominant sector in most developing economies, and it's critical to economic growth. For example, just to give you a couple of figures, in 2019, last year, the share of agriculture in GDP ranged from 25% to up to 60% in some low and middle income countries. So really that shows the importance of the agricultural sector. So the agriculture has a power to transform economies, a very large power, but it also has impacts, and including social and environmental impacts. And I think it's important to look at those impacts throughout agricultural supply chains. So agri-food companies operating in these supply chains can have large impacts on local developments, both positive and negative, including on nutrition and food security. So this year, FAO's published a flagship report named The State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World, that illustrates that although Asia achieved the most progress of all continents in reducing undernourishment this year, it is still home to more than 55% of the undernourished people in the world. And a recent report from Chatham House says that malnutrition among workers in developing countries costs businesses up to 850 billion a year. And the worst hit industries are those relying on manual labor, including agriculture. $850 billion a year, it's an enormous amount when you think about it. The same report states that addressing poor diet in supply chains is fundamental to upholding human rights and productivity. But then we have now also the COVID-19 pandemic and the economic crisis that it has created. And we expect that this will raise the number of hungry people. It was already high last year, about 750 million, almost 1 in 10 people in the world. And now FAO estimates that with the COVID pandemic and its economic crisis, another 83 million people and possibly up to 132 million people may go hungry this year. So these are a huge number, over 100 million people. Also the increase of extreme weather events caused by global warming, like typhoons and drought, will compound this situation in the coming year. We know that this year is already set to be one of the hottest 3 years on records. Humankind has only a few years left before a destructive and irreversible process sets in. That's why this decade, the decade to 2030, has been dubbed as the decade of the last chance to reverse this trend. Interestingly, last week, UNEP just released its Emission Gap Report 2020, which says that although the COVID-19 pandemic caused a brief dip in carbon dioxide emissions, the world is still heading for a catastrophic temperature rise above 30 degrees, sort of above 3 degrees by the end of the century. And that's far beyond the goals of the Paris Agreement, limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees and even possibly below 1.5 degrees. So due to the influence that agriculture has on development, it's very important to ensure that safeguards are in place and respected to protect small-scale producers and workers, to protect their rights and to protect their families. It's important to consider the COVID-19 impacts, as supply chain pressures may exacerbate existing business risks and bring about new challenges. Much remains to be done to lift people out of poverty through agriculture, together with business. There's a number of issues such as land and water scarcity, also growing demand for certain commodities that can reduce the availability of crops used for local consumption as staple foods. So it's important to give businesses the tools to understand how their operations can bring about such impacts. In FAO, we have a solid experience developing multi-stakeholder platforms for sustainable production and trade. For example, the World Banana Forum that was launched more than 10 years ago in 2009. FAO is also launching an initiative for responsible supply chains in the pineapple and avocado industries. It has collaborated with the OECD and various stakeholder groups in the OECD FAO Pilot project for responsible agricultural supply chains, which was implementing the guidance, the OECD FAO guidance with companies. So based on this experience, we echo the OECD's key report finding that building better and more dynamic cooperation with various actors is key to ensuring that due diligence works for inclusive economic growth. These actors include governments, civil society organizations, companies, cooperatives, and other groups. Both the OECD project in Southeast Asia and the OECD FAO Pilot project revealed that the majority of companies still don't make reference to due diligence in their annual reports. In fact, the OECD FAO Southeast Asia project reports that only 44% of surveyed companies will produce a public report on responsible business conduct and due diligence in 2020-2021. So it's critical that we do our part in bridging these gaps and that we facilitate progress in responsible business conduct and risk-based due diligence. Therefore, focused initiatives such as the OECD Pilot project in Southeast Asia can help translate due diligence into development. And also it can help better tailor outcomes to the needs of vulnerable groups, including women, youth, and the millions of people who go hungry and struggle with poverty. So I very much look forward to following today's discussions, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Pascal. And again, this was a very rich keynote with lots of information about what the FAO is doing also to improve agriculture supply chain. And again, I would highlight how pleased we are with the cooperation, not only in this project, but overall with the FAO. I've also seen that there are some links to reports in the chat. And as Shivani said earlier, I would also like to encourage participants to share any information that they think is useful and could be shared with others. Just put them into the Q&A or into the chat so that we can all benefit from that. So with this, I would like to thank the three keynote speakers again. Thank you very much, not only for your speeches, but also for your cooperation in making this project possible. And I pass on the floor to Shivani. Thank you very much. Oh, and before that, I would like to thank also Shivani, Rena, Robin, and Anne for their excellent work in organizing this event. So thank you very much. And Shivani, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christina. And again, a warm thanks to our keynote speakers. I think for the really set the stage, put it into context. The pressure is on. And what we want to turn now is to a panel discussion where we will really go into the findings of the Southeast Asia pilot. And I just want to, well, the way it's going to work is that we'll have presentation of the key findings that will be done by Rina Hinoshita, who's an analyst with the Center for Responsible Business Conduct. And then we'll turn to a panel discussion where we have three really great discussants lined up for you. But before I turn it over to Rina, I would just like to say that the OECD FAO guidance and the due diligence framework within it, it's really a practical framework and tool to help companies along the entire value chain address some of these, frankly, very entrenched and difficult challenges facing the sector. In some ways, it's the unglamorous work of actually taking action within your business decisions, within your risk management systems, to actually identify and then prevent some of these risks from actually turning into negative impacts. And when I speak about challenges, we know, I mean, there are many. I mean, in the chat you just saw from Mehdi Souk, who's our national contact point from France, the issue of forced labor in cotton fields. I think just in the last couple of days, there have been a number of articles highlighting this issue, notably in China. And we are also seeing, you know, we've heard as well from Pascal, and he highlighted the UNEP report on the carbon gap. So the issue of climate change linked again as well with things like the environment and health, soil health, which have of course an immediate and direct impact for agriculture producers notably. So look, I'm not going to take too much more time. I'd like to now turn it over to Rina Hinoshita to provide us with some of the key findings. And I would again welcome everyone to, of course, you know, listen to the presentation, but also think about some of the questions that you may have so that we can manage some of that during the panel discussion. Rina, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Shivani. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I'm Rena Hinoshita, analyst at the OECD RBC Center, and together with Shivani, we promote implementation of due diligence for RBC in the agriculture sector with business, policymakers, and other key stakeholders. Robin, could you go to the next slide, please? Next slide. Thank you. So, as Shivani mentioned, OECD conducted a pilot project with agribusiness companies from 2019 for about 10 months under the Responsible Supply Chains in Asia program. So the purpose of this pilot was to support companies in Southeast Asia along agriculture supply chains, in increasing an understanding and application of the recommendation of the OECD FAO guidance. Next slide, please. So 23 companies in this pilot are from Myanmar, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam, including both large enterprises and SMEs. Over 90% are involved in cross-border trade within and beyond Asia. So this diversity in size, handling commodities, and scope of operations provided valuable insight into the challenges and opportunities for improving RBC and supply chain due diligence. Next slide, please. So what we found from this pilot. So despite the short 10 months time frame, the pilot found positive changes in company RBC policy and due diligence practices, notably step 1, 2, and 4 of the OECD FAO guidance 5-step framework for due diligence. So in step 1, 38% of companies made changes to strengthen policies related to RBC standards, and additional 50% started considering to make such changes. In step 2, 44% of companies increased risk assessment for Tier 1 direct suppliers and 38% for suppliers and business partners beyond Tier 1. We also noted that 63% of companies agreed COVID had influenced the need to increase levels of risk assessment. As you see in the slide, some companies also have increased verification of due diligence effort in disclosure, which is one of the cross-cutting RBC standards, and several issue-specific standards such as environment, food and safety, food security and nutrition, and health and safety, etc. Yet steps 3 and 5 remains an area for improvement. So companies could make further effort in devising comprehensive strategy to respond to identified risks. So such fit-for-purpose strategy is critical for companies to effectively prevent and mitigate adverse impact on RBC issues. So reporting publicly companies' supply chain risks and due diligence actions, such as process, findings, action plans to address risks, is still challenging for many companies. Next slide, please. So based on these pilot findings, we draw several recommendations to businesses. So first, companies should continue to integrate RBC recommendations such as OECD FAO guidance, CFSI, ASEAN LI into company management system. Adopting such standards enables accountability and specificity behind company commitments and helps signal to stakeholders the global benchmarks that companies intend to implement. The OECD FAO guidance due diligence framework can also help companies operationalize these RBC recommendations. So secondly, companies should continue expanding supply chain mapping and risk assessment of business relationships beyond Tier 1 suppliers to understand adverse impact in their supply chains. So this helps them improve strategy to respond to identified risks too. Companies may find it challenging to assess risks related to suppliers beyond Tier 1, especially when companies do not have a contractual relationships with them. In that case, companies should identify control point enterprises in their supply chain, or may pursue collaborative effort in increasing visibility and leverage to influencing their business relationships further up the supply chain. Also, companies should strengthen public reporting. So business partners such as investors and export markets and civil society, including NGOs and consumers, are increasingly looking at this report to assess companies' RBC performance and make informed decisions. So more and more jurisdictions and stock exchanges are also setting specific requirements on due diligence reporting. communicating relevant information is key to building and maintaining trust in their action and decision making, and demonstrating good faith to these relevant stakeholders. Next slide, please. So the pilot also provides key learnings for policymakers. So companies are very keen to learn from good practices and resources to have a clear understanding of expectations on RBC and due diligence, including public reporting. They are also seeking for more guidance and learning opportunities such as this pilot to meet RBC standards and growing market expectations. We also learned that national and export market regulations and leadership at the corporate senior management level and business partner requirements are key motivator for companies to commit to RBC policies and implement due diligence. So policymakers could reinforce actions to promote RBC and due diligence in line with international standards, including OECD guidance. And as Southeast Asia has increasingly become a net agro-food exporter, policymakers could boost trade facilitation effort by supporting and strengthening RBC adoption by exporting companies. For example, increasing availability of the credible information on traceability, origin, as well as due diligence of exporters can help create greater confidence in the global market and enabling environment for trade. So we hope you found these takeaways from this pilot useful, and I believe you would be very interested in hearing from the next panelists on their views. So without further ado, please let me turn it over to Shivani to kick off the panel discussion. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Reena. And folks in the chat, we've also provided the access to the actual final report. And I think there you will be able to see the detailed findings. We're going to turn now to the panel discussion, and I'm really pleased to welcome a fine set of panelists that we have. Let me first of all make some short introductions to them. The first panelist that I'd like to welcome is John Simpson, and panelists, I'd invite you to put on your cameras so that we can also see you. Yep, great, I see all of you, fantastic. So John Simpson is a managing partner with Bluegrass Partners, and Bluegrass Partners provides advisory services and investment advice to agribusiness corporations in Asia, in Southeast Asia in particular, but also in Southern Africa. And John brings a wealth of investment experience, over 12 years of experience, also working very much in the food, agri, and the agri sector itself. He's also been quite involved with work in the CFS RAI Rome in the initial development of that with the FAO. And he, importantly as well, he also sits on many different boards. So we're really looking forward to hearing his views as well as to what investors are saying, and also the leadership of boards. I mean, how are they actually influencing the way businesses are operating today? So we have John, who will provide a couple of insights, and I'll turn to him in a bit with some questions. I mean, I would invite folks as well in the audience to address your questions to the specific panelists that are coming up. We then will also hear from Alison Watson. Alison is a consultant who has worked for many years in the agricultural and food systems on policies and partnerships. She actually worked very closely with us at the OECD, leading on the Southeast Asia Pilot. So she brings a wealth of experience in actually talking to the companies directly of what they said to her. And I just want to also highlight the focus of the pilot was not to rank or evaluate each individual company, but really to gain experiences and understand what are some of the overall learnings we can take from this, this very diverse group of companies within Southeast Asia. Alison is currently working on a number of regional major projects in Southeast Asia, particularly on climate smart agriculture and integrated pest management. Finally, we'll hear from Imke Greven. Imke works as a land rights policy advisor. Land issues are a significant area of concern, of risks as well. And Imke is a policy advisor with Oxfam Novib, Netherlands, and her work focuses a lot on particularly the Dutch financial sector and the private sector related to obviously respecting land rights, which is one of the key areas as well within the OECD FAO guidance. Just so to explain a little bit the context, prior to doing this work, she also was behind the Oxfam's Behind the Brands campaign. I think that was quite a signature publication. I remember reading it quite closely, which assessed the 10 biggest food and beverage companies. And if I'm not mistaken, it was really the retail section that was under scope there. So again, you'll see we've got a group of panelists. We've got investors, business leadership. We've got Dr. Watson, who's really worked very closely with many of the companies involved in the pilot, and Imke, who brings forward the perspective of civil society, in particular looking at the issue of land rights. With that, I'd like to turn first to John. And John, due diligence, we've been talking about due diligence and risk-based due diligence. Could you tell us how is it helpful to you as an investor, and if so, how is it helpful? So broadly from the investor community view, and then you were part of the pilot as well, and from your point of view, how did it also help you specifically in this? And I'll start with that, and then we'll go for another round of questions later. The floor is yours. Thanks.
Thank you, Shivani, and I'd just like to say a big thanks to the team, Reina, Shivani, Alison, for working with us. It was a very enjoyable process being part of the pilot, and thanks to Brian Baldwin for the introduction initially. As to your questions, for due diligence is a kind of tenet of any investor's responsibility. Investors, whether it's a financial investor or the mergers and acquisition team, investment team within a agribusiness company, it's really the main performance in terms of risk management is measured from the due diligence that they conduct. Typically, when looking at an acquisition or looking at an opportunity along a supply chain, the first round of due diligence that would be done would be a financial due diligence, just to see whether the numbers match up of an opportunity. Following that, there would then be some operational due diligence, looking at the actual performance of that supply chain. And then after that, you would have legal due diligence. And then typically, to be honest, until now, this ES&G due diligence would really be low down in the list. And at an investment committee or amongst the team leading the assessment of an opportunity, that would typically be low down. A lot of funds would be allocated to it, but it would be a check-ticking exercise, a checkbox ticking exercise. As impact investment is developing and becoming core and center in the investment community, and of course, as transparency and regulation and governance around the environment and how people are treated in supply chains, and looking at supply chains from more than a financial perspective and more than financial opportunity, and assessing it in these other spheres, this is becoming increasingly more important. But what we don't necessarily have are established tools, toolboxes to use in that due diligence process. And that's what's so important with the OECD pilot for these organizations, for these private sector actors, because it provides their teams who are looking at these supply chains with those tools. It's really important that investment community, they love these tools. I mean, all of financial underwriting is using very well established, decades old financial methodologies and very well known and very standardized approaches to making valuation investment return analyses. And so if we are able to introduce similar tools for investors when assessing the equity in supply chains for other actors, the externalities that result from our actions in these supply chains and on the environment, then there's a lot more likelihood that investors will make these decisions and move that ESG up where financial return is hit. They'll move it much closer there if they have those tools to use. But I think it's very clear we're at a very early stage. There's a lot of confusion for investors. There are many different guidelines out there. They're not often so clear how they can be implemented. That's why it's very important the work that the FAO and the EU are doing at the moment for their private sector strategy and engagement there in supply chains. And so, and likewise, the importance of this pilot.
Great, thank you, John. No, I couldn't agree more. The need to actually create, for many of the companies that we've been working with over the years, the question is not what to do, but how to actually implement it. And I should actually highlight that on the OECD side, in addition to the due diligence for the agricultural companies, there's also similarly a due diligence framework that we have been developing for targeting investors specifically. So I think that might be something to potentially marry and actually maybe even deeper down or focus targeting specifically agricultural investors to see how we can actually begin to look at certain metrics and measurement, because that will help eventually quantify and then move, as you say, move this issue up on the agenda. Thanks very much. I do want to turn now to Alison. Alison, you were involved very closely with this entire pilot there from the get-go, working with all the different companies, speaking with them, hearing from them, all during this crisis of COVID, which struck us in the early part of this year, late last year. Just given your experience, could you walk us through a little bit, even in terms of due diligence, what are you seeing as the biggest challenge for companies to actually implement due diligence? Is it, what is in your view the biggest challenge? Is it a lack of awareness? Is it a lack of leverage throughout the value chain? Is it leadership? I really would like to tap your knowledge into that, and building on that, how can we influence those companies that are not that interested in implementing due diligence? Do you have some views on that? So I'm going to turn the floor over to you, Alison. Thanks.
Hi, Shivani. Well, they're two big questions. I think the first question, there's no biggest challenge for implementing due diligence across the supply chain. I think there are numerous big challenges, and they're also very different for each company. So it really depends on the maturity of thinking within the company towards, embracing a comprehensive approach to responsible business, that maturity of that thinking, the location of the operations, the available resources they have at hand to support implementation of due diligence, and the risks that they face as well, which are many and different in different locations. And there are also different values that companies have and place on those risks as well. So there's not one big one, there is just numerous and diverse challenges. I think what is common, however, and what came out quite strongly in talking to companies was the sheer complexity of agricultural supply chains. The multitude of leverage points across the supply chain and across operations, the ever-changing dynamics of your B2B, your B2C stakeholder relationships, not to mention the key relationships of the community that you may have operations based within. And we should also keep in mind, I think, that the regulatory environment also plays a critical role and was also, a key driver for improving responsible business in many of these countries and in these companies, and that can be extremely complex working in countries, and that the policy environment from each country, even regions within the same country, can be very different. So that's something that these companies have to try and manage and develop a risk-based due diligence framework within. I think another aspect is that the ability for any one company to control actions of stakeholders beyond tier 1 is, you know, diluted. So when you don't have a direct contract with a stakeholder, it's very hard to sometimes influence their behavior and drive change. And so how companies approach that, I think, is an ongoing task. I think what the pilot did, though, was it just provides that platform for different companies to engage together on those issues and those challenges. And I think that peer-to-peer learning was really important, and something that John was just talking about as well. There's still a lot of work to be done, and I think it's really important bringing the different, you know, stakeholders within the value chain together to talk about how do we address some of these complexities and challenges. So that was your first question. And just quickly, I think on, you know, the interest of implementing due diligence, I think is very high. I think most companies, I mean, all the companies in our pilot were interested in implementing, you know, risk-based due diligence and a strong responsible business conduct framework. I think the issue is just a little bit more complex, though. It's around, you know, how much resources do companies have to implement due diligence? You know, how much time do they have? How much money do they have to allocate to that? How many skilled people do they have in their organization that they can draw on to help them develop, you know, a risk-based due diligence right across their supply chains, which is difficult to do. So I think the other, just I guess in summary, is how do we communicate due diligence? It's going to be different, I think, within the organization, and it needs to be very clear, and there's no one way of doing responsible business conduct. We need to make sure that we're looking at the outcomes. That's what's really important. Are we making positive change towards more responsible business conduct? Can we measure that change? Do we see a really big difference on the ground? And that goes beyond policy or statements or ideas. It actually goes towards implementation, and that's where we need to move to, I think. So I think we're all there, but it is a journey, and we've got lots of work to do, but it is an iterative process.
No, thank you, Alison. I think you've made some really excellent points there. And with regards to, it's interesting, I'm also keeping an eye on the chat, and I see that there's, you know, calls for, you know, moving towards more regulatory, moving away from the voluntary approach to more regulatory approaches. And I mean, that is a constant debate.
But I think a lot of companies, I mean, also express that desire for a level playing field. I mean, that is really important as well. So, you know, you want a certain standard to be, and everyone sort of getting to that standard so that you can compete on a fair basis. And so that's an important part where the regulator is extremely important.
Exactly. And I think just in the audience today, we actually have a number of folks from countries, policymakers, and regulators actually on the call. So I'm sure they're listening closely to what is being said. But I'd also be keen to also hear from some of the companies, maybe through the chat, if you're interested as well in either expressing a point of view or posing a question. The other point you mentioned was on capacity building and in a way, training. And I think that's something we heard loud and clear as well through this project. And one of the outcomes actually following on through this project, which we are going to be launching next year, is an e-learning, set of e-learning modules. Not that that's the silver bullet, but I think we need to start thinking about ways in which we can actually raise the skills capacity of folks in the operational part of these businesses to see how can they actually begin to operationalize some of these recommendations or guidances in a concrete fashion. And understanding and knowing what it is the first step to doing so. So thanks a lot, Alison. I'm going to finally to Imka. So Imka comes to us from Oxfam on the land rights issues. Imka, I'm sure you've got a lot of different points. So I'm going to keep it very open and welcome you to just give your points of views and your perspectives. But what was most interesting for you? You see lots of these different reports. You follow what companies are doing. It's high on your radar. What was interesting to you about the report? One of the things that we work on a lot is we talk about meaningful stakeholder engagement, engagement beyond, companies are of course very familiar and comfortable working and engaging with other companies, their customers, their suppliers, but we often, talk about engaging with civil society, for example, or groups like yourselves. Could you maybe also talk a little bit about some of the ways that companies can do that? The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Shivani, and thank you for the invitation for being here. So to your first question, I would like to answer with 3 points. So first, I think in a very short time frame of 10 months, the pilot shows positive changes in RBC policy and practices, such as this has been explained, the expansion of the supply chain mapping and risk management beyond the tier 1. However, I also need to say that I would love to encourage companies to improve on the adoption of grievance mechanisms, which still remains limited. The provision of remedy for adverse impact is needed, especially when they cannot be prevented. In addition, public reporting on RBC policy and practices remains an issue as well. The second thing I would like to mention is that I find it really interesting to learn why companies move, which I think is not unexpected. So raw material supply shortages due to climate change and the impact of COVID-19, but also the importance of national and export market regulations. And I think this really also shows indeed the question on whether voluntary initiatives do work. Because if companies need or are motivated to improve their due diligence by regulations, then what does it tell? Third thing I would like to mention is that I'm happy to see that peer learning has been successful and helpful, because indeed this how question is what we come across very often. And I think that is also where NGOs and CSOs can play an important role. So as you alluded to before, Shibani, with the Behind the Brands campaign a few years ago, some companies made great commitments, for example, to zero tolerance for land grabs. And early next year, we will publish an evaluation of like 5 years after. So how are the companies faring in implementing these commitments? And this also really comes to the how question. So to your second question, like how can CSOs help companies to do their due diligence? I think first, what's really important to notice is that in reality, we see for CSOs it's difficult to connect with companies and vice versa. And there are different reasons. NGOs can play a bridging role in these by bringing stakeholders together in meaningful stakeholder engagement, and also really to bridge the gap between talking about financial matters and financial materiality versus local human rights impact. But very important is trust and mutual understanding, which are fundamental. And I think it's very important also there for companies to understand that when they do reporting, when they are open and transparent, this will increase the likelihood of trust and collaboration. And again, also the pilot indicated that companies often don't know how to do a proper verification of due diligence effectiveness, for example. CSOs have the technical expertise. They do know what's happening on the ground. They do know the culture. They do know how to do meaningful community engagement. So I think there's like a very rich potential there.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Imke. No, I think you touch on a number of key points, and I think this is one of the threads that is going through. And in fact, Pascal, you as well highlighted this in his opening remarks, the question of reporting. And I think sometimes the feeling is that reporting, it really doesn't add any value, but it actually helps increase the level of transparency and understanding of what is happening in the supply chain. And that's one of the areas within our OECD due diligence process that is actually really a critical part of the process. It's not the only part, but it's a very important aspect. And of course, with reporting, it's also important to highlight relevant information, relevant and useful information, to also demonstrate, first of all, understanding of what the risks are, and then importantly, demonstrating and explaining what are these steps that are being taken to address some of these risks or mitigate some of the problems. And it goes hand in hand, of course, with, you can also have the regulation aspect of it, but certainly by providing public reporting on the key risks and the actions over time, this can really go, I say, into your point, to building that trust, and including the trust in actual just business broadly. I'm going to go back to the panelists and pose another round of questions, since we do have some time to do that. To all three of you, but I'm going to start with John. What do you think are some of the incentives that would work for business to actually integrate and put in place these recommendations on due diligence? What are some of the incentives that you think would work for the businesses?
So, I mean, in many ways, what's been interesting in the finance space over the last years has been the introduction of sustainability-linked loans. And quite a few have been issued where I'm based in Singapore to some listed agricultural companies. And that's basically where you're connecting the cost of capital for the company with its performance in these areas. Now, I think realistically, this is one of the strongest incentives that can be used. Unfortunately, we live in a time perhaps where it can be argued, certainly in many of the countries in which I work, where governance and the capability of governance is moving backwards. Either that's due to fast moving changes in how we operate digitally, the erosion of competency of governments, as well as lack of coordination from a global level. And in that aspect, what governs the private sector and how they act, and certainly at the end of the day, the cost of capital for a company, how much they borrow at, how challenging it is for them to find their financing and resources to invest across supply chains, to develop their businesses for their working capital, it can be a major limitation. It's already a major limitation. It was referred well to early in the introduction about the financing that's needed for agricultural supply chains to develop. If we can really begin to link companies' cost of capital with how it's performing, we will, at one end of the scale, we'll create champions, and at the other end of the scale, we'll find ways of dealing with non-compliance. Michael Riggs asked a really good question in the chat regarding this, regarding non-compliance, and should we move from a voluntary system of implementation and move towards more governance in terms of how this is managed, and making companies, rather than voluntary signing up to such initiatives, that it should be required by them. And the question is, who will make that, who will govern that? And if it's the financiers, as well as governments, as well as local governments, etc., then we have a stronger chance. And I would agree with Michael there that voluntary guidelines perhaps aren't strong enough. I would be perhaps at odds with many of my peers, but I live in Singapore, and it's a example case where actually strong governance can really work. Of course, the stakes in Singapore for non-compliance can be quite high, and that's of course what many companies are worried about. We cannot use non-compliance cannot be used by governance to extract additional resources out of the private sector and bribes, etc. That's always a worry. So other innovative tools like sustainability-linked loans could be very impactful. Thanks.
Thank you, John. No, and I would also just like to highlight to folks, as part of the pilot, we also had a peer learning webinar on the financial sector, and that's actually in the report in the annex, and you'll see a summary note. And we certainly found that the role of the financial center to drive more responsible investment and behavior change is really quite quite critical. And there's some interesting developments there, because we are seeing a positive trend towards the use of sustainability-linked loans, where frankly the interest rates are tied to the performance of ESG indicators, and that's then verified by third parties. So that's again in ways that you can see that, you know, very concretely it's linked back again, as you say, to the actual the financial cost of doing business. But I wanted to turn to both Imke and Alison as well to give your thoughts of how to you know, improve or sort of push you know, to create this level of urgency to actually implement and put in place in due diligence. And I would also take this opportunity now just to say if you have any you know, last comments or remarks to make, because we're going to be closing this panel in a couple of minutes, to take the opportunity to do so as well now. Alison, the floor is yours.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about incentives, I mean, these are pretty standard around, you know, can I have more access to the market? Is the ease of doing business, is that improved? If I do, you know, more of this responsible business conduct, if I do risk-based due diligence, is my reputation protected? Can I improve my reputation? Can I ensure that I have an ongoing license to operate? Does it actually save me time? I think that's a big thing that people forget. Does it, therefore, is it the ease of doing business? Is that improved? Because that can be very complicated. All these relationships and all these, you know, relationships that you have to have with tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 and plus to do, you know, very detailed risk-based due diligence takes a lot of time. So you have to think about that aspect. Talking about incentives, does it give me a better financial performance? And do I have access to better finance and tools as part of that, which is what John was talking about. I think what's important here is there leakage, though, in the fact that if people are in a system, if I can just go to another country and trade there, and they don't care as much about, they don't put as a higher value on responsible business conduct, then that's when it becomes difficult, because that's when you have to have leadership amongst your shareholders and amongst your board, your management board, and your senior executives to say, well, actually, we do care. These values are important to us as a company, because there's always that choice there. So I think that's really important. And I think this peer-to-peer benchmarking within this group, within having different stakeholders exposing to different experiences and learnings, is really important, and it is a way to bring people along that journey. I think just before I go, I mean, there's a couple of I guess surprises that not surprises, but things that are of interest. And I think what is really important for me that came out of the project is that there was a lack of written policy in lots of areas. For example, you know, Imke mentioned grievance mechanisms before, and human rights. And of course, having a written policy doesn't actually mean anything if it isn't implemented or enforced. So that's a real key thing. And companies that don't have written policies may still be doing very good stuff around human rights and grievance mechanisms. But it is difficult to manage risk if you can't measure it, and it's difficult to measure if you don't know what you should be measuring, or you don't have a benchmark for that from year to year. And that's where it's useful to have a written policy, so that you can have that measurement and you can then benchmark yourself and your improvement across time. And I think that's a key lesson, I think, that should come out of this pilot. If I was to mention one or two. I think the other thing that came out was that there's a lot of focus sometimes on issue-specific types of issues, but when it comes to the cross-cutting issues or cross-cutting standards, like, you know, the grievance mechanisms, impact assessment, benefit sharing, disclosure,
gender,
gender, they were a lot weaker. And I think they are the glue that holds together responsible business conduct. And I think that's really important to remember, because to get a very strong framework for responsible business conduct, you need those in all the issue-specific approaches that you're undertaking in responsible business conduct. You need good disclosure. You need a gender policy. It doesn't sit by itself. It is cross-cutting for a reason. So there needs to be, I think, a lot more focus on there. And lastly, I'm going to be a little bit challenging here to all the international organisations, but I think the lack of reference and use of international standards and guidance documents was quite clear. Lots of companies weren't referring to them. It was very low use. And I would say there that I think policymakers in the international organisations need to think quite clearly about maybe taking some responsibility for that as well. So making sure that when you are developing these at an international level, that you are involving and thinking about their implementation more at the ground level within companies from the very start. And I think that's a key thing. So that sort of is my couple of comments, but I'd just like to thank all the companies that did engage with me and were very open. And I thought it was really great to see that across this COVID time and all the challenges that companies were facing, there were actually considerable improvements from all these companies involved in the pilot on verification, strengthening their management systems. So it was really pleasing to see. So thank you.
And just to build on what you were saying, the other aspect of referring to international standards, actually having the policy, and you're right, it's the first step to have the policy. But when you have a policy, and that's one of the things that came up from the findings of the pilot, which also I was really pleased to see, is that the conversation and the accountability or these questions around sustainability are beginning to move up even within a company. And I think we should not kid ourselves, but there needs to be ownership and leadership at the company level.
Yeah, definitely. And I think if you haven't got your senior leadership team engaged on this and leading from the front, it's very difficult for anyone else, no matter how engaged and excited they are about sustainability and responsible business conduct. You really need someone at the leadership level taking responsibility and driving it.
Fantastic. And I also just want to highlight to folks again, as part of the Southeast Asia pilot, one of the findings was that many companies didn't quite understand what a grievance mechanism is. So we actually put together then a short brochure note explaining the different types of grievance mechanisms that you have out there. Judicial ones, non-judicial ones, operational grievance mechanisms, etc. So I would encourage those of you, companies in particular out there, to take that resource and feel free to use it. But let me to wrap up and turn finally to Imka. Imka, any last thoughts and last words? You're seeing in the chat as well. Another point about the need to actually work increasingly with governments as well. And I just want to point out, in fact, that's one of the benefits of the Responsible Supply Chains in Asia program, that the actions and activities are dual. They're targeted both to companies directly working with businesses, but also working with governments in the region. So there's also a lot of work going on, and I'll probably share the link to the program. And Laurent may also wish to highlight that in his closing. But it's a lot of dual working as well with the governments, because the governments also need to be able to create an enabling environment. And what does that mean? And I'm sure many of you have also thought about, I think Alison mentioned the leakage question. And so the OECD, even though many of the countries that we may be thinking of are not complete or full members of the OECD actually works at the end of the day very closely with a number of key markets in the region, including, for example, Indonesia, also China, Brazil, India. And so through this work, and we'll hear from our colleagues in the Global Relations Secretariat and their work that they're doing also in the ASEAN context in the next panel. Imka, sorry, I've taken up some of your time, but I'd like to turn to you for any last words, any last thoughts that you may have and like to share.
I think, thank you. I think many has been said. And I want to acknowledge that there are companies who are really front runners, who really try. But I think we can just cite the report again, that companies themselves say that they are motivated to implement due diligence by strong regulations. And I think that says it all. I mean, if we talk about incentives, we should not wait for front runners to do some good work and have the great intrinsic motivation. We really need to have like an equal playing field for all. And if companies don't know how to do it, then a regulation will give them the incentive to find out how to do it. Yeah, and I can just keep it there.
Great, thank you very much. With that, I'd like to thank our panelists for taking the time this morning, for sharing their views. I think it was very, very helpful, very fruitful. There's still a long way to go, and we're going to turn now to the second panel. And I apologize to Tomislav from the FAO, because I'm sorry, Tomislav, I ran a little bit over time here. But Tomislav is an advisor. We work very, very closely together. He's working together with Pascal Liu and myself on responsible business conduct at the Markets and Trade Division at the FAO. And here we'll turn towards promoting due diligence at scale in Southeast Asia and ASEAN. And I'd hope that you keep those questions coming in as well. Tomislav, the floor is yours. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Shivani and colleagues. Very happy to be here today to discuss this important issue today on panel 2, which is promoting due diligence at scale in Southeast Asia. Now, very quickly, we heard some wonderful points, particularly from, the last panel and from the introduction this morning. Alison mentioned particularly that supply chains are definitely different, and we need to keep that into consideration, right? They're not homogenous, particularly across different commodities, right? A rice supply chain is very different than a pineapple or sugar supply chain, and we need to keep that in perspective when really looking at risks and the way that different supply chains can bring them out in different country contexts. Rina and others as well mentioned that monitoring or looking at risks beyond tier 1 is often challenging. And, we've known this for a while, but this is, issue still continues to rise to the fore. So we really need to place more effort on how due diligence can really dig deeper past tier 1 through leverage, in particular, amongst other tools. And lastly, as we heard from Pascal this morning, a key finding from the OECD Pilot project is that only 44% of companies surveyed in this project intend to mention how they're going to go about implementing due diligence next year in their reporting mechanisms. Now, when we look at that 44%, the question is how many of these companies are actually engaged in useful due diligence, right? That actually targets those risks beyond from tier 1 and onwards as well. So we have to look at the quality of due diligence mechanisms in addition to the simple reference of. Now, today I'm going to have 4 panelists who are going to be able to discuss and speak to some of these issues in greater detail. And I'm going to, introduce them very quickly. So first we have Hideki Kagohashi, who's an enterprise development specialist at the International Labor Organization in the Philippines. Hideki has over 30 years of experience with international organizations, nonprofit organizations, and consulting firms as an expert on SME development, value chain development, and most recently looking at the impact that the future of work has on technologies for decent work. I'm going to start with Hideki first, and we're going to go through the rest of our panelists as we continue. So Hideki, if you allow me, I'm going to ask you a question here that I hope you'll be able to speak to. From your perspective, what are the most pressing and challenging areas for labor-related due diligence in the region? And what kind of principles are guiding ILO actions to promote agri-supply chain due diligence in the region? Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Tomislav. By the way, do you hear me well? I have had some challenges with connectivity.
Yes, we hear you well. Please go ahead.
Excellent, thank you very much. And just to double check, are you already combining question 1 and question 2, or are you still holding question 2 for me?
Yes, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Oh, okay. Well, so let me try, okay, because overall I have 5 points. I think, first of all, the speakers prior to this session have already broadly agreed on the critical importance of going beyond tier 1 and its challenges, no? And my first point is that it is the overall productive and decent work situation among MSMEs, including informal operators as suppliers beyond tier 1. That's been the traditional and ongoing challenges of the agriculture supply chain in the region. We need to work on that. Besides that, the COVID-19 crisis also highlighted that the challenge also lies on the MSMEs in the rest of the supply chains, such as in the transport, logistics, and retail chains, right? For example, realizing safe workplace in terms of COVID-19 infection prevention and control. Many small supply chain operators in this segment suffered from infection indeed. Okay, so but by the way, this safe workplace question in the context of COVID-19 has been the most frequently asked questions over the last few months addressed to the ILO help desk for businesses, right? So it's an important issue to be highlighted. As you can see, these small farms and MSMEs are not owned by multinationals or national lead firms, right? So it is beyond the conventional legal obligations of multinational enterprises, but therefore falls under the corporate social responsibility as we define it, going beyond the compliance of its own factories. Therefore, it's important to recognize that this is not the sole responsibility of multinational enterprises, but it's the responsibility, well, it's the systemic issue. Not any single person, single actor can resolve, right? Because it's systemic, this requires the joint efforts of the broad tripartite plus stakeholders, right? Including multinationals, national lead firms, the producing country governments, employers and workers organizations, and other concerned parties within the countries, as well as the concerned parties in the importing countries. Who could contribute all to enhancing the decent work of the micro, small, medium enterprises in the agriculture supply chains. No? Take an example. I'm talking about very much the structural challenge of the agriculture sector itself. Take an example of the smallholder dominated agriculture in the Philippines with the aging farmers, 50, 60 years old, working part-time. With this reality, we can't simply expect decent work and responsible business conduct will be realized in the upstream farming practices without bringing the structural changes to the agriculture sector. And most importantly, making the agribusiness attractive to bring back the young talents and the investments back to the sector. This way, we have to create more decent work opportunities for women and men in the local community in the agriculture sector. This is where the compliance goes with the competitiveness. Okay, I have to run through the 4 additional points I'd like to make. The second point is, okay, the international broader environment. Very important to recognize the recent developments of the key drivers of change in the broader international business and human rights community beyond the instruments of the ILO, OECD, and the UN, right? Yes, we are starting with our own instruments, but very important to recognize such development as the increasing number of free trade agreements with more and more explicit social and environmental clauses, and the enactment of a series of supply chain acts, the Modern Slavery Acts, the Child Labor Acts, the Financing Reporting Directive of the EU among key importing countries, right? And this list now includes the latest EU adoption of the Magnitsky-style Act with sanctions. Some of you are very much concerned about the voluntary approach. This one is a very hard one. And ongoing discussion of the EU on its due diligence directive. All these have a very strong impact beyond the national regulatory environment we are talking about. So because of these developments, I'd like to emphasize once again that although we seem to talk about the voluntary nature, it is the responsibility of the multinational enterprises to reach out to those small business partners on decent work issues in line with the international expectations as expressed in the international standards such as ILO M&A Declaration, OECD M&A Guideline, and the UN Guiding Principle of Business and Human Rights, etc. Right? My third point, I hope I'm keeping my time. We shall leverage the OECD national contact points and the ILO M&A Declaration instruments, including our national focal points being created in this region, to jointly address the responsible business conduct among MSMEs in the agriculture supply chains. For one, we will be providing training for OECD national contact points on the issue of ILO, the labor standards, and the ILO tools and resources. And I'm very glad to recognize that the next one will be done in partnership with another EU-funded project, Trade for Decent Work. My next, which is the fourth point, the connecting back to the structural bottlenecks of the agriculture sector issue, we endeavor to bringing in the practical guidance and tools, existing ones, for the realization of decent work for MSMEs in the agriculture supply chains. We have a series of analysis of the value chain for decent work of the agriculture value chains in this region, as well as the rest of the globe. And we are implementing the assessment of the vulnerabilities, such as the impact assessment of the COVID-19 on the informal economy. 2, the practical guides on safe return to work, safe workplace checklists, and the sector-specific practical guides for the agriculture sector. We have some of these are developed over the last few months. Point 3, we have been conducting a series of training on COVID occupational safety and health for SMEs, as well as micro and informal business environment under this pandemic.
Great.
4, ILO training specifically addressing.
We'll have to go on quickly to the next speaker, but I'd like to thank you very much and really quickly mention to you here that your comments on SMEs are absolutely crucial. We know that SMEs represent the overwhelming context of any economy around the world. So ensuring that they're included in any RBC or due diligence activities are absolutely critical. So I'd like to thank you for that. And with that, we'd like to move on to the next speaker. And introduce Max. Max comes from a very interesting perspective. Max Bulakowski is a policy analyst at the Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions, and Cities at the OECD. He works on issues related to social economy, social entrepreneurship, and social innovation. And prior to joining the OECD, Max was part of the Business Incubator and Social Innovation Think Tank in Brussels. Max, I'd like to ask you here, in addition to the EU-supported program on responsible supply chains in Asia, this particular project, can you describe OECD actions to scale up good business practices in the region? Over to you, Max.
Hello, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the very nice introduction, Tomislav. And indeed, OECD has been operating for now 60 years this week, but we have been actually very active in Asia since the 90s. And since 2014, we have a strategic partnership with the region, which is implemented through the SEARP, Southeast Asia Regional Program of the OECD, and for which I've been working for the last 5 years and managing a number of activities. And actually what is very important is that indeed from the very beginning, one of our objectives under that program was to create a dialogue with the private sector. And that's why we started working since the very beginning with the ASEAN Advisory Council, with the ASEAN Secretariat, in order to try to understand what are actually the issues that businesses face on the ground, and translate it into the policies and help to create a dialogue between the different actors. And of course, since this year, we have produced numerous amounts of papers related to formalization of enterprises, last year, actually this year, we sent out a report on formalization of microenterprises, on investment policy reviews, which tackle issues of RBC and how it is important to create a due diligence. But I will focus today just on very few concrete initiatives that we have worked in the last few years. So first of all, I wanted to highlight the ASEAN Policy Index. And it's an interesting example because we tackle some 17 policy areas, and we collaborate on one side with businesses, but then with policymakers, and trying to measure and understand the issues of each of these things. Specifically, what is important that this is a publication that we publish every 4 or 5 years. So we see the progress in policies every time. And so the first one for ASEAN was published in 2014, and the last one for 2018, which specifically included issues related to cooperatives and social enterprises, and how it is important for businesses to get registered and to have good accounting practices. So this is one element, and we have been working on that. Since 2017, together with IBAN and ESCAP, we have been collaborating with the ASEAN Secretariat on improving the ASEAN inclusive business. And inclusive business is a very relevant initiative also because it's a lot about how you can integrate this small micro enterprises, very often, specifically in Asia, working in the area of agriculture, into the global value chain and improve their due diligence practices, help them improve the standards. And I'm very proud that this year, together, we have contributed to the ASEAN Inclusive Business Policy Guidelines. I will send the link later on. But this is a section which actually was endorsed by all the ASEAN leaders. And what is important about it, that it specifically gives concrete examples also on how policymakers can support responsible business, to integrate into the global value chains. We're also now in the process of promoting a tool, an online tool, which was developed together with the European Commission, which is called Better Entrepreneurship Policy Tool. And it's an interesting thing because it allows businesses and associations representing businesses to value their appreciation or perception of certain policy areas. And we typically do it also with the policymakers. And while this is a tool that helps you to create these graphs and create where there's a disconnect. It specifically focuses on inclusive entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship policies. And we're now speaking with the ASEAN Secretariat about the possibility of conducting webinars specifically promoting these tools. Voila, and there's one thing which where I just wanted to share experience also of my colleagues, where we also look at the impact of digitalization and what it can actually develop and how can it promote businesses becoming more, more sustainable and ensure better practices. And I have actually colleagues who work on the links between distributed ledger technologies or blockchains and specifically related to agri-food supply chain. So they have launched two concrete examples of how this blockchain experience can help, for example, for the seed certification or for the veterinary certifications and decrease the costs and improve the improve the quality of products and make it cheaper. So a number of studies are currently being implemented and they're going to conduct a webinar in the next few days around it. Voila, this is very briefly, and but basically, please do check our web pages. I see Shani kindly put them on the chat, and don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Max, for that intervention. And, I'd also like to stress that, the OECD's contribution to the recently endorsed ASEAN Inclusive Business Policy Guidelines and the clear links that have been made there to responsible business conduct. So that is quite important to be able to highlight here. And with that, I'd like to segue into our next speaker, which is very fitting in this context, and that's Graham Dixie, who's the Executive Director of Grow Asia, which is a multi-stakeholder multi-stakeholder partnership that catalyzes inclusive agricultural development. The platform mobilizes over 500 partners in 46 working groups. Graham has around 35 years of professional experience, which includes actually working as an agribusiness advisor for the World Bank. Graham, I'm going to ask you a question here, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing your input. Can you tell me what are the existing challenges to the uptake and impact of due diligence in the region, and what might be, how could we possibly go about addressing some of these issues?
Great. You can hear me all right?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. So I mean, there are three major challenges that I see. I mean, the first one is interest. And we need to understand the agribusinesses, and we divide them in our group into three groups. The first are those that are really committed. The second group are those that are not yet convinced, but are interested in finding out. And the third group, which we don't get much in our group, is those that are not even interested in the first instance. To put some possible numbers around that, the World Benchmarking Alliance asked 350 of the top agribusinesses about their adherence to the Sustainable Development Goals, and only less than 4% were in the committed category. 70% were in the not yet convinced category, and about 28 of those, 80% of those major companies were in not yet, not even particularly interested. So we need to understand that. The second point is that they are confused. The consistent message we hear from the private sector is there's such a plethora of different stands out there, they're not sure which ones to follow. They're confused. The third one, and this is particularly relevant for Southeast Asia, it is so much easier if the idea is locally initiated and locally owned. I mean, we were really fortunate with the ASEAN guidelines for responsible agriculture investing that the ministers asked for it. We developed it, it was adopted by them, so you've got the license to operate, but people are aligned and committed to it. So then if we turn to the second piece of part of the question, so what are the solutions? There's been a lot of emphasis here, quite rightly, on incentives. And I won't go through those, but I do think it's worthwhile stopping for a second and to balance what Imalka is saying with what Alison and John were saying. Clearly, there is a role for two sides to this. One is the carrot and the other one is the stick. And if you get those two to work, you're much more likely to happen. So the people we find that are really enthusiastic are the ones whose financier are insisting on it. It opens up new market opportunities. But there are other pieces that come out from these that actually, if you do behave responsibly, you have a lower level of risks, etc., etc. We need to be able to emphasize, and in fact, what you really want is champions from the private sector to emphasize the benefits that they get out of following standards. And the second side is clearly the regulatory side. But it is so much easier if someone is actually wanting to implement those agencies than rather you trying to beat them up for doing it. The second thing is uptake. We know that Bill Clinton had that wonderful statement, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. And that so often when International Development Agency comes out of ways of implementing a program, they are far too complex. Almost every project that I have seen, that at the midterm review, they've had to simplify it. And we need to be able to make, as John and others have pointed out, is that we need to make those tools easy and we need to make them really implementable. And clearly one of the major lessons that came out of the OECD pilot was that the great benefit was when those peers spoke to one another and they learned from one another, because that's where they mostly do their learning. And then finally, to make it easy on yourselves, when you look around at the number of different standards out there, and we didn't even have to look very hard, and we found 17 different standards with different levels of uptake around agriculture and the way these are implemented. But we mapped them out and found that actually there's huge levels of overlap. I mean, clearly there's only a certain number of things that you can put in responsible investing and being responsible for supply chains. They need grievance mechanisms, they need consultation. So the point that we have been made to make it easy on the private sector is to point out this, that if you are adhering to one of those 17 standards, you are in most cases 80% of the way there. That what you need then is to just add on 2 or 3 new little pieces there, which will then make you compliant with the ASEAN guidelines. So to summarize, the points here are, it makes an awful lot of sense to really understand the incentives and what the private sector is about. You need to be very clear about the why. They need to be easy to do on the how, and try and make them so that they're additional to what they're already doing. You're not coming up with something new. And the final point is the critical importance of local ownership and local exchange of information. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Graham. And you know, that was a very thoughtful intervention there. And you know, as I think it's important to outline that you know, and stress what you mentioned, that there is a lot of confusion on the market, particularly amongst enterprises who don't know, and investors as well, who are confused with different standards, different guidances, etc. For those that are not in the know, Grow Asia, the OECD and FAO have been working closely to try to address some of these issues and create greater coherence amongst different actors, amongst all of these different standards that are around. So I thank you for your intervention. And I'll proceed now to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Nariluk Pai Chai Pum, who's the director of the International Human Rights Division at the Ministry of Justice in Thailand. Nariluk has extensive experience working with representatives from governments, civil society organizations, domestic and nonprofit organizations on a wide array of human rights issues. She holds a bachelor and master's degree in private and business law, and an MA in theory and practice from the University of Essex University in the United Kingdom. Nariluk, I'm going to ask you one question here, and I'm equally keen to hear from your perspective on your activities that relate to this project. Can you please tell me what are the most important actions that the Thai government is taking to promote RBC in your country? I'd be keen to hear about how that really looks in practice. So the floor is yours.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me? Okay.
Yes, please go ahead.
First of all, I'd like to thank the OECD and other partners for inviting Ministry of Justice to be part of this panel and join the panel, join with all distinguished panelists. And for Thailand, I would like to divide the way we promote responsible business conduct into 2 main levels. First, at the policy level, the government has developed the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. In Thailand, we work on the issue of business and human rights and responsible business conduct. You know, we work together. So we have developed kind of the policy framework, naming it National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights, aiming to be the policy guideline and framework for responsible business conduct for all sectors. The reason behind this is that because there was an increase in the number of complaints related to human rights violation by business. So the government had decided to make a voluntary pledge to the UN Human Rights Council and on the putting forward the concrete implementation of the United Nations Guiding Principle on Business and Human Rights, and also to develop the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights to make sure that all business will be responsible and respect human rights. The development of National Action Plan on Human Rights, on Business and Human Rights was started since 2016 with the participation of multi-stakeholder, including the government, state-owned enterprise, business, civil society sectors, and academic and public. A number of consultation, workshops, seminar, meeting and also public hearing was conducted in order to make sure that everyone has a chance to provide inputs and contribute to the action plan. The National Action Plan was finally approved by the Cabinet on 29th of October last year. It was the outcome of the smart mix measure of the mandatory measure for the government and voluntary measure for the business sector. For the government, we set up the duty and activity to promote responsible business conduct, such as the duty to amend the law to be in line with international standard, the duty to strengthen the labor inspection, promote gender equality and non-discrimination in workplace, conducting environmental and health impact assessment, and monitor the cross-border investment, etc. And for the business sector, we just set up expectation of the government towards the business in order to encourage them to be more responsible. For example, business should ensure the fair wage or fair promotion and respect diversity in workplace, engage with the affected community, conduct impact assessment before, during, and after finishing the project. The monitoring and evaluation of the plan was supervised by the National Committee on the Implementation of the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights, which is comprised of the relevant sectors and including business, state enterprise, and also the business, the government. And it meet regularly about it's about 3 months, every 3 months, to follow up and pushing forward the implementation of the plan. The second level, the practical level, I would like to highlight on 5 key activities. The first awareness raising activity is the key activity to promote responsible business conduct in Thailand. Ministry of Justice, as the key agency to pushing forward the responsible business conduct in Thailand, has regularly organized awareness raising activities to business. And most of the time we organize by ourselves, and sometimes we join hand with our partner like UNDP, OECD, ICJ, CSO, and other CSO, academic institution. And sometimes we were requested by business sector to be speaker for them, as well as their supply chain. This is also, in the past, it's included the fishery sector and agriculture sector as well. Recently, in order to make sure that the knowledge will be useful and practical for business sector, we are joining hand with the Global Compact Network of Thailand and UNDP and Office of the Security and Exchange Commission of Thailand to set up the Business and Human Rights Academy, which is actually aiming to be the regional hub of Asia of knowledge and the knowledge on responsible business conduct. The first pilot project was just launched earlier this month, and the course just finished yesterday. The first group of pilot project just finished yesterday. So I think we will get a good feedback and comments to improve the curriculum for the next training. I personally believe that every business sector, including agriculture, will be benefit from this Business and Human Rights Academy. Importantly, during the past 4 or 5 years, we have joined hand with ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights every year to conduct the training on responsible business conduct and human rights to our friends in ASEAN. And Minister of Justice was regularly invited to share Thai experience on promoting responsible business conduct to our friends. And it's like growing trend in ASEAN to be more interested in this issue. The second activity that I like to highlight is the Human Rights Award, which is initiated by the Ministry of Justice 2 years ago. The project aims to encourage responsible business company who is willing and ready to be the role model for the friend to apply to get the award. So far, the project is quite successful because many big companies, which is certain that their work is in compliance with the international standard, the winner will be invited to share their experience to their friends. And more companies are interested to join this project, including small and medium-sized company. But we have to admit that we have to work harder on the small and medium-sized company. Ministry of Justice is also currently studying the possible incentive that can encourage business to be more responsible. Third one is on the development of the development from the regulator. Namely, the Office of Security and Exchange Commission of Thailand recently just issued a regulation to enforce all listed companies to disclose information through our supply chain and related to the impact on human rights, including environmental, social, and good governance by the end of next year. This can be another measure to ensure that responsible business conduct among the listed company. The fourth one is on the latest Development Endorsement of Mediation Act, which is entered into force November last year. The act will help setting up the mediation system, including the mediation of case related to human rights violation by business. Good news that by the end of this year, 50 mediation centers will be set up in Bangkok, and by the end of next year, 878 mediation centers will be set up in every district across the country. This will also help solving the problem and try to build up the momentum of compromising between each other with the satisfactory in the like solving problem in a peaceful way. Lastly, in promotion of I think the promotion of understanding on human rights due diligence, which is the key activity to ensure responsible business conduct. And however, there are a few different tools to use to conduct the human rights due diligence in Thailand. Recently, we are working with UNDP and ILO in providing training on human rights due diligence, using both to instill the knowledge on and skill on human rights diligence to business, and we hopefully next year we will broaden the training to the small and medium-sized company as well. And we are also working with OECD in translating human rights due diligence to translating due diligence guideline, and hope that we can use it to instill the knowledge to the business as well. Before ending my talk, I would like to highlight on the key challenge of Thailand is the small and medium-sized company, because in Thailand 90% of business are small, medium-sized companies, so we have to work more, including agriculture. And I'm very happy if everyone can follow any technical assistance and any suggestion in this regard. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nariluk, and I appreciate your intervention and your excellent work that you've been doing under the NAP, your cooperation with the ILO, with the UNDP, with many other important UN sister agencies to follow as well. So I'm very happy to hear that, and also we hear this echo throughout, which is this support that's needed for small and medium enterprises, and we've heard that from Hideki and from you as well, in addition to Max. So with that, I'd like to thank you, Nariluk, Hideki, Max, and Graham, for your excellent interventions, and I'll be passing the floor on to Shivani. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tomislav, and I just want to apologize and ask for everyone's indulgence to just stay on for a couple more minutes. With not much further ado, or any further ado, I'd like to actually turn and give the floor back to Laurent Lourdes, the Councillor Agriculture and Sanitary Phytosystems and the Environment from the European Union of Thailand. Laurent, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. I will try to make it short. Thank you very much for this session. It was very, very interesting. So yes, I will conclude. So dear panelists, dear participants, and dear ladies and gentlemen, it was a great honor. It is a great honor for me to conclude this event. As expected, presentation of the pilot findings, feedback from participants, stakeholders, panel discussions were very informative, and I would even say very promising for the future. I think there are many ideas for further cooperation. It is impressive to see that even over a short period of time, about 10 months, participating companies were able to carry out positive changes in their responsible business conducts. It's also very encouraging to hear that many of these companies will expand and develop policies commitments in the future. Such business cases, I think, should be used as examples to other stakeholders, and notably SMEs, to engage on the same track. As already mentioned in my welcome remarks, sustainability, including responsible supply chain, responsible business conduct, due diligence, notably in the agri-food business, is deeply anchored in the EU treaties and its policies, and more initiatives are to come, as you know. The EU, as policymaker, will continue to play its role in promoting sustainability at the EU level, but also with third countries and certainly ASEAN partners. The EU Green Deal, as well as the Farm to Fork strategy, set up very clear objectives to support sustainability. The Green Deal sets out how to make Europe the first climate neutral continent by 2050. It maps a new, sustainable and inclusive growth strategy to boost the economy, improve people's health, quality of life, care of nature, and leave no one behind. The Farm to Fork strategy is at the heart of this Green Deal project. It addresses comprehensively the challenges of sustainable food system and recognizes the links between healthy people, healthy citizens, and healthy planets. This strategy is also central to the Commission's agenda to achieve the UN SDGs. All citizens and operators across value chain in the EU and elsewhere should benefit from a just transition, especially in the post-COVID-19 pandemic and the economic downturn. In that respect, it is interesting to note that from the survey, 2/3 of the companies agreed that COVID-19 had influenced the need to increase level of risk assessment along the supply chain. The Farm to Fork aims to promote a global transition to sustainable food system. We talk about the global standard sustainability. And the sustainable food system designed by the EU will be sustainable in 3 dimensions: economic, of course, environmental, but also social. We are convinced that we will better succeed in this endeavor by creating solid partnerships based on close cooperations with our international partners. We're now talking about green alliances with partners, and certainly ASEAN countries will be one of these partners. Through trade agreements, and notably through the TSD, Trade and Sustainable Development chapters in the new generation of FTAs, and also international cooperation at bilateral and multilateral level, the EU is also promoting sustainable farming practices, reduction of deforestation, preservation of biodiversity, the adoption of global standards ensuring high level of protection for human, animal, and plant health, and improved food security and nutrition outcomes. In addition to these policies, the European Commission envisages the adoption of legislative proposal on sustainable corporate governance to ensure long-term sustainable and responsible corporate behavior horizontally across sectors. We're talking here about the mandatory due diligence concept, which was already discussed today. The Commission initiatives aims to reinforce stakeholders' responsibility all along the supply chain by notably enabling companies to focus on long-term sustainable value creation rather than on short-term benefits, aligning the interest of companies, their shareholders, managers, and society, better managing sustainable related matters in their own operations and their value chains. On another front, the EU Council recently adopted, actually it was 1st December, 2 weeks ago, conclusions on human rights and decent work in global supply chains. It clearly sets a clear direction for the EU member states and the EU Commission. So the Commission is asked by the Council to come with legislative proposals in the coming months or years in that respect, and we will do. All in all, agribusiness companies from the EU, but also ASEAN and Asia in general, complying with such codes of conduct, for example, farm to fork, and mandatory due diligence, will obviously gain a better access to the EU market, considering EU's consumers' very high expectations when it comes to sustainability. In that respect, it's important, for instance, to get companies like CP Foods, which participated to this study in Thailand, which are big exporters of foodstuff products to the EU. Important to know they are on board. Outcome of the survey displayed today show that companies are aware of this and are ready to change their policy to respond to those new requirements. This is very encouraging and promising, as I already mentioned. Again, let me thank all the participants, national authorities, companies, OECD team for their very valuable contributions to this pilot project. This is certainly only the beginning of more cooperation between the EU and ASEAN to reach common objectives. The recent upgrade of the EU-ASEAN relationship, now considered strategic partnership, as I mentioned in my introduction, will allow more institutional dialogue and cooperation on this issue in the future. So this is in short what I wanted to say. Again, thank you to all of you, to all the participants, to the OECD team. And thank you for your attention, and I wish you a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laurent. And look, I think you've said many very important points. You've raised many important points. I think the question on incentives that was in the Q&A, I think it's very clear that these are the incentives. That's what we're working with. I just want to say that we've plummeted you with a lot of links in the chat, but there are also people behind, these passionate people behind this work. And so I'd encourage all of you listening in, again, thank you very much. Don't hesitate to get in touch with the various people you're seeing on these links, particularly from the OECD. I can certainly volunteer that. And I would also say from all the international organizations. Watch this space. We are continuing to work in Southeast Asia and Asia more broadly. And we look forward to continuing partnerships with all of you. With that, I want to say again, thank you very, very much, and wish you all a very good rest of day, and I'm closing this meeting. Thank you again. Bye-bye.